goodness gracious me, marketeers, holy smokes. We are very, very, very similar people. And I think we just need to be aware of that. Our job is not to market to ourselves and our friends, but to understand the people out there.
Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. I'm the founder of Automated Creative, the creative effectiveness ad tech platform. And this is a podcast about the future of data-driven marketing. And I get to interview some of the high flyers and celebrities from this industry. And this week is no different. I'm on a call with Grant McKenzie, who is CMO at Asahi Europe and International. Grant, for anyone who doesn't know who you are and what you do, could you give us a bit of background?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Tom. Hi, everyone. So I'm Grant. I started my career in marketing in 97, working for Mars in Slough. Working in a chocolate factory is just a fantastic thing to do, I've got to tell you. So I spent 8 years there. And in 2005, I moved from chocolate to beer, as you do. And I joined a global beer company called SAB Miller. I spent about 11, 12 years in various local marketing roles across Europe. And in 2017, the business was bought by Asahi, which is a Japanese beer company. And since then, I've been doing above market and global roles. So today I look after the marketing function in Asahi Europe and International. It's around about 200 people in marketing, mostly situated in the local markets. And I also look after the 5 global brands. The 2 most famous are Peroni Nastro Azzurro and Asahi Superdry. So that's me.
So Grant, in that career, what has been the best investment of your time, energy, or money?
Well, I think there's no question for me that having grown up in Scotland, going to university in Scotland, starting my job or my working life in the UK, moving abroad, getting out, seeing the big world, living in foreign places. So in 2000, I moved to the Czech Republic, which was a bit rough and ready in those days. A tremendous experience. The language, Czech language, is kind of like Chinese. It's extremely hard. I think it's the 5th most hard language in the world to learn for English speakers. So that kind of took you a little bit out of your comfort zone, or took me out of my comfort zone. I lived in Spain, which was, ironically, probably culturally the most challenging place for a Scotsman to live. You know, so many things were different. And I think in terms of marketing, it really helps you stretch your mind muscles, because the things that you consider to be normal or common, you realize are very culturally specific. So they may be very true in the UK, but very much do not apply in other markets. I think also in terms of leadership, you know, the ability to connect with people from different cultures. I mean, in my job today, I have to connect with Italians and Romanians, so passionate Latins, as well as Dutch and Polish and even fruity British people. So I think no question for me, having that international experience working in different markets has been a game changer. I mean, just the other week, I was actually in China, Shanghai for the first time, and wow, is that different? You know, I think one of the questions you ask in global marketing is, when you're developing a brand for you know, the world, which markets are genuinely different? Because everybody says they're different, but what sometimes you recognize there are very few differences. You know, surface difference, yes, but not deep, meaningful differences with consumers. But then you go to China and you go, okay, it's different. It's really different here. The use of technology in that place is just like absolutely stunning.
Give me an example of that. What was it that struck you there as being like profoundly different?
Well, there's people on the street selling bits of chocolate. You know, street salespeople, and they have a QR code tied around their neck, and you pay for everything with online mobile. You just pay for mobile with absolutely everything. There's beggars, people begging, and they've got a QR code. So I think the use of tech is quite stunning. The fact is that you go to a supermarket. So in our case, if you sell beer, you're quite used to doing market visits in supermarkets. How does the category look? How is it merchandised? Well, there was no one there. There were like about 50 to 100 staff, and we were the only shoppers. And we were like, oh, it must be a quiet time. And they're like, no, this is normal. So basically everything is online now. Everybody gets everything delivered. So, you know, category management, as we might have called it in the past, doesn't mean anything here, because it's online shopping. entirely. So it makes you think, wow. And I guess, places like China and parts of Eastern Europe where I spent a long time working, have skipped. It's this leapfrogging concept. So they went from having no phones to 100%, broadband connection and mobile phones everywhere. So it shows you how technology can really, change lifestyles, I guess.
So how does that glimpse into a completely different tech and marketing and fulfillment culture help you plan what you're going to do in the next couple of years?
Well, clearly you get some inspiration and ideas about how you could reach consumers in a different way or talk to people in a different way, but it also gives you a foresight of what's to come. And you look at the brands that have been successful in that environment or the categories that have been successful, and it gives you a perspective. I think, sometimes in the past, there was a feeling that from the West or from the UK, we were bringing expertise to the East. But in fact, in my experience now, it's as much the other way. And when I say East, I don't just mean China or Asia, but also, Eastern Europe. A lot of great practices over there, I think would be really relevant to the UK market, because it's certainly interesting in our category. The development of the category, the profitability of the category, the brand development of the category, in many cases in the Eastern Europe is more successful than Western Europe. So I think it gives you a foresight about what can be achieved.
So I have this theory that the goal of all innovation is to become completely boring. It has to start off as like a shiny new object, right? It has to, like, whether that's AI or voice or, like one-click delivery or whatever it is. Like the first time you do these things, they're like, oh, wow. Or like at the first time you spoke to Alexa, for example, the way it came back was quite impressive. But for these things to work, they've got to scale and they've got to become commonplace. And as soon as they become commonplace, they cease to be interesting. So that, the world you're talking about where you're paying everything on a QR code, even like someone who's having a challenging time and they're begging on the street for money, like at the point it becomes ubiquitous, it ceases to be interesting as a thing in itself.
Well, I would say that usefulness overtakes novelty. So I think it's, the technology becomes more useful than entertainment. And at the beginning, it's more like entertainment or niche. But yeah, you've made it. When it becomes, useful, incredibly useful. It's true. Well, I think for marketeers, the other thing I just wanted to mention was language. So I think, British people are pretty bad at learning languages. I left school and I had, studies in chemistry and physics, which have turned out to be completely useless to me. I wish I'd learned the languages, but now that I have learned a couple of languages, it really exercises also different muscles around, words, because I think great marketeers have some of the skills of the great authors or journalists. You need to be able to use language and understand how language can influence, I think, people. So I must say that's made a profound impact on me as well. I wouldn't underestimate it.
I always think on the British point there that Europe gets the good weather, but they all have to learn to speak our language. I think that's the reasonable trade-off. Moving on, we're going to move to your top tip, basically. What is your top data-driven marketing tip that you find yourself relying on or sharing or calling back to?
Well, I think it's just a mindset. And I'm very sure I'm not the only one in this podcast who said this, but marketeers have to realize that most people are not like us. And that our job is not to market to ourselves and our friends, but to understand the people out there, So I think we've got lots of data in our business, and most of it is not used today. So sometimes when I hear that, the future is going to be like, data led, I'm like, well, we've got a bunch of data. People don't use it. People are the weak link here. Humans are most complex people. And I guess, my advice is just remind yourself that people are not like us. Marketeers are a strange breed. There's an interesting statistic about how similar people are together, and they looked at generations. And one of the things I think is very unreliable is generational or demographic marketing. We're going to market to Gen Z or Gen X or Gen whatever, and you realize these people are not very homogeneous at all. But they did this survey and they found that, for example, being a lawyer, you've got obviously much more in common with other lawyers than you do with people from your own generation doing other things, but not nearly as much as marketeers. Goodness gracious me, marketeers, holy smokes. We are very, very, very similar people. And I think we just need to be aware of that.
So I'll just go back one step to saying you've got a ton of data in the business, but it's not being used and people are the weak link, which is nice. But why isn't that data being used? Like, you're not the only business that produces a massive amount, but you think it's being unused by the business or by marketers? Help me understand that a bit more.
Well, I think marketeers generally like to focus on the outputs, the creativity, the stuff that appears in the market, which I understand, me too. And the stuff that goes on behind the scenes. So understanding the opportunity, quantifying that is just the time. It's just the area you want to spend. They want to spend less time on. I think there is the bias around when the data and the numbers confirm my opinion, I definitely use it. And when they don't, maybe they're not right. So I think having that discipline, to use the numbers, I think is just sometimes challenging to make it work in an organization. It's like, when you ask about advice, you give marketing, young, ambitious marketing people. I mean, I guess it's obvious that I would say this, but I would say, go and join the big marketing schools, go and join the big companies, learn your trade, learn the skills. Don't go and do a startup, don't go and do your own YouTube channel yet. Don't spend a lot of money on an idea that you think is brilliant, because probably 95% is going to fail and you'll learn something from failure. I get that. But, a lot of the reasons it's failed, you could have predicted had you got the right training in the first place. So I think, there's a little bit of a tendency to walk away from, discipline and kind of traditional schools of marketing. But in fact, I think they're a brilliant place to get the foundation. And so I think, the numbers question for me is not, do we need more data or better data, but do we have a culture where people, use it and think about it? And I guess that's the biggest challenge for most organizations.
And what do you think's the most important skill here? So I love that little anecdote. You're like, oh, when the data supports my view, I'll rattle it out all day long. And then if it doesn't, then you'd say, hey man, I'm experienced. Come on, I know a creative idea when I see one, because both of those things are true, right? But what is the skill? Like if you're advising someone who's junior on your team and they're coming up and you're saying, look, you need to leverage the data in the right way and leverage your creative muscle. Like what's the most core and common practice that you see in people that are doing this well?
I think it's all about making connections. So the data tells me this brand is losing market share. Well, that's just one point. What other data points do you have there? Well, we have their advertising tracking performance. Okay. We have their price point and their promotional weights. We have their distribution, and you start to put the pieces together. It's like having a page with like 6 or 8 pieces of information. Each one on its own isn't very interesting, but put together, you've got a picture of what might be happening here, and you start to see the impact, cause and effect. And I would say that would be my advice: is don't use as much of the source data as you can, and try and build up a holistic picture of what's happening here. It's like you're diagnosing something. Success and failure, understand both, and you'll realize in most cases, particularly in our category, it can be fine lines. It can be 2% drop here, 1% drop here, can have quite a profound impact either way. So I think using multiple data source, that's what's critical.
This episode of the Shiny New Object podcast is brought to you in partnership with MadFest. Whether it's live in London or streamed online to the global marketing community, you can always expect a distinctive and daring blend of fast-paced content, startup innovation pitches, and unconventional entertainment from MadFest events. You'll find me causing trouble on stage, recording live versions of this podcast, and sharing a beer with the nicest and most influential people in marketing. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com. So we're going to move on now to your shiny new object, which is, I'd say, probably the shiniest object around at the minute, which is artificial intelligence. So that's a broad category that we've got 10, 15 minutes to get into. But I really want to know why you've chosen this as your shiny new object and why, for you, it represents the future of data-driven marketing.
Yeah, so I am definitely not an expert on AI, but I've got really excited about this in the last 6 months. We had our marketing conference, and we always think, what's going to be the topic, the theme we want to talk about. And it just struck me that we should talk about AI. So this year, our conference was Terminator 2023, the rise of the marketeers. And when I was doing the research for, the presentation, it struck me that this AI can be quite profound for us. I started to play around with it, see how it could be used. And it really got me quite excited, more than I was expecting to. So, for instance, I did a short summary. I said, all right, let's try and make a picture for one of our brands, like a classic key visual, if you like. So I put in a few prompts, gave it some information, and what it came back with, I can tell you in about 5 minutes, was pretty decent. I mean, really decent. We've seen a lot worse work than that from some of our agencies. I looked at, doing a couple of studies. We asked it for some prompts and words, came back, some really, really fascinating and insightful stuff. Is it unique? No. So at the moment, I think the challenge is around uniqueness, and that's, I think, the role for marketeers. But on a basic level, it can really speed up things pretty nicely. So I challenged us as an organization that I think, it's not the end of AI is not the end of marketeers, but it is the end of mediocre ones. Because if you're not better than AI, I don't need you. I simply don't need you, because the AI is going to be, obviously cheaper and obviously faster. And I think that's true for marketeers. And I think that's also true for agencies. And I think it will probably accelerate the changes that we've started to see, things around in-housing, taking more control of the creative. I think that stuff will accelerate with AI.
So it's interesting to hear you say that. And I've also been on a similar journey of, experimenting almost for the fun of it in a work context. And one of the things that strikes me about the way that a lot of people are talking about AI is they're marveling at the fact they can do what they're currently doing faster and cheaper, right? So if you're like, write me 50 characters in a social post about this beer and make it 50 characters long, right? It can crank out that thing that would have, you'd have to written a brief for that would have gone to the agency. They would have to come up with 5 different versions. You'd have a discussion about it, whereas you can crank this out, right? So essentially, let's assume that the quality is the same, right? Which I think you're alluding that it will get there, but it's not quite there. Once the quality is the same and everyone's doing everything a bit faster and a bit cheaper, and it's not like it's a big investment. What, ChatGPT, like 10, 20 quid a month, something like that, maybe more. It's easy to use. You don't need any training and it's cheap, which by my logic means that everyone will do it at some point. And when everyone's doing it, everyone's going to save that 20% in production. Everyone's going to save that 20% in creative time and whatever it is, then becomes a different zero. So what I'm really curious to know what's coming out of your head and out of your conference was, what are you guys going to do differently? Or what do you think certain people in the industry will do differently now that they have this technology that can do stuff far quicker?
Well, I think about it a little differently. So, 65% of our work is that consumes the time of our people is that kind of work. And if that work can either be eliminated or reduced, it gives you more time to do the stuff that we know we should be doing more of. We just don't have the time or always the money to do it, which are the really profound stuff. So you're right. The biggest challenge from AI is everything's going to look the same. It's not going to be completely wrong, but it's not going to be inspiring or exciting necessarily. And that's where the space for the true marketeers comes in, and the true agency work that's really, really profound. And I think, we had this concept in the past of the big idea, the big creative idea, which was like a unifying concept that would really excite consumers and could be used, through the line. At the moment, we run around, we do so much day-to-day stuff, so much performance stuff. I think occasionally that gets lost and we don't have enough, good, solid thinking time. And what I see the advantages of AI is to just free up time to think about something more profound and important. I think on the cost side, the media has become more fragmented. It's much more challenging to reach people. Yeah, we need the money to reach people. Although, of course, there are other ways of doing it than traditional media. I think one of the reasons we've stepped into sports partnerships is because sport is a unifying, platform. And it's one that does actually reach a lot more people now than some of the traditional medias.
So I don't think anyone's ever talked about advertising in terms of being profound before on this podcast. And it's really interesting for you to bring AI as a topic. But then what you're actually talking about is the core skill of the marketer or the agency, as you say, is to make those connections and leaps that a machine can't, based on feel and experience and a semantic understanding, I guess. So why that surprises me is that that's not happening anyway. Like, is it just because there's so many channels? Is it just because the industry is moving so quickly that you guys don't get the time you need to spend on that, having these sort of transformative thoughts? Is that really the problem? It's just, it takes too long to do all of this stuff that you don't get enough time to think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of management of the day-to-day, right? So generally speaking, basic work is delegated to junior managers who don't always write very good briefs. In fact, if you ask my agencies, I think they'll probably say most of the briefs are rubbish. So we have to kind of change those, look after them, shepherd it through. It takes a lot of work from the senior managers, instead of actually, giving it to a machine, approving it in 1 hour, and then having time to think about something more important. And of course, the marketeer's job, communication is 25% of our job. We are all the time on business cases, looking at financials. We're looking at pricing decisions. We're looking at, in-store materials and all kinds of other things. So, time is the biggest, I would say, challenge at the moment. I think if you ask most marketeers, that's, if they're honest, what they'll say. Of course, we'd like more money, always want more money. But if we're really honest, our biggest, challenge is time. So my excitement about AI, when I saw how quickly it was able to deliver stuff that was of an acceptable quality, yeah, maybe not world-shaking brilliant, but pretty decent, that got me thinking, wow, all right, now I've got my smart senior managers, gonna have more time to do other things, the things that we really know could make the big difference. And that's, I think what gets me more excited. And then secondly, the in-housing part, where we're on the beginning of that journey. We're a bit behind some other people, and we're looking at across, a business with, 13 languages and lots of local brands. How can you in-house? And I think AI, you can see how that would speed up things like language recognition and all the rest of it. It could really make that more of a reality for us,
So if you were going to hire someone in the next however long, and you wanted them to have some AI smarts or experience or knowledge or understanding, what would you want them to be saying to you in that interview to make you think, right, I need you on my team because AI is going to be important for us to experiment with, and you've already done X, Y, Z? I'm curious to know what you would look for. What would they be saying to you?
You know what? I wouldn't hire someone who's an AI expert. I mean, I always want to hire marketeers, people in their minds and their souls who recognize what marketing, how profound it is in an organization, what it can do, and what we are here to do is to really understand, particularly in our industry. I don't market to billionaires or niche people. I market to the mainstream, even the premium brands. Yeah, so everybody who's a beer drinker occasionally drinks premium beer. So it's very important to have your feet on the ground and to understand that this is a part social psychology job. You need to understand what drives people to make decisions, how the role of the crowd can influence people. And then you need to be, skilled at using words and using pictures. Those are what I'd always go for first, because I think AI, and I don't want to undermine, the skills involved. I think it will get to a point where it's going to be quite user friendly. It's like going back 15 years and say, would you hire people who know how to use mobile phones? No, because I think the mobile phones will adapt themselves to us so that even dummies like me can use them pretty easily, right? So I think the skills of the marketeer are going to become more valuable. And the basic people who turn up to work, write mediocre briefs, don't really understand consumers, we don't need them anymore. They're on the way out.
Well, Grant, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. And that's a nice point to leave it on. So if someone wants to get in touch with you, talk about AI or living and working abroad and learning a different language and becoming a better marketer, where would you like them to do that? And what makes an outreach message that you will actually reply to?
So LinkedIn is fine. I mean, I get a bunch of messages. I mean, I'm sure like a lot of people, right? I get hassled a lot. So I think, have a point of view, be interesting, and know our business, my business, right? So don't be generic. Know our business and have a point of view. And generally, when I get interesting, connections, I always reply.
Well, Grant, thank you so much for your time.
No, you're welcome. Thanks a lot, Tom. It was fun.
Hi. Just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the Shiny New Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That'd just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.